Bad test case practices. Let's take a look at 3 bad test case practices and learn how to avoid them. Dependency between test cases, poor description of the steps, poor description of the idea and/or expected result. Dependency between test cases. Dependency is the opposite of independency. An independent test case is a test case that does not rely on any other test cases. Example: Test case 1. The steps, enter living room. Head for large leather chair. Open right external pocket of backpack. Expected result: beer mug. Test case 2. The steps. Enter living room. Head for large leather chair. Open left external pocket of backpack. Expected result: potato chips. As we can see, steps 1 and 2 are the same in both test cases. Hence, there can be a temptation to improve the steps, especially after learning about test case maintainability. Let's do this and see what happens. Example: Test case 1. The steps. Enter living room. Head for large leather chair. Open right external pocket of backpack. Expected result: beer mug. Test case 2. The steps. See steps 1 and 2 from test case 1. Open left external pocket of backpack. Expected result: potato chips. Does test case 2 look more modular now? Maybe. Should we use this practice? Never. Why not? What if test case 1 is deleted because we don't need it anymore? For example, no more beer during fishing. Steps 1 and 2 of test case 1 are changed. For example, beer mug is put into another backpack, which is in the kitchen. In both cases, it's not clear how to execute test case number 2 because we either don't know the steps at all or the steps that we have are not correct. Another frequent situation occurs when there is an assumption that the software, for example DB, is brought to a certain state because previous test cases have been executed. Example: Test case 1. The steps. Set the count of MasterCard transactions in the DB to 0. Buy a book using MasterCard. Expected result: the transaction success code is 20. Test case 2. The steps. Buy a book using MasterCard. Expected result: the count for MasterCard transactions is 2. So, test case 2 was written with the assumption that before its execution, test case 1 had already been executed. The code tested in test case 1 doesn't have any bugs, so all data is generated in the correct way. What is wrong with this approach? In real life, many things concerning test case 1 might happen. For example, test case 1 might be deleted. Test case 1 might be modified so that it creates transactions with a different credit card, for example, Visa. Test case 1 might not create any transactions simply because the code is broken. In all 3 cases, the execution of test case number 2 will at least lead to confusion because its execution relies on data generated during the execution of test case 1. Thus, a good test case doesn't refer to other test cases, doesn't depend on tracks left by the execution of other test cases. Hence, if we have 10 test cases which are independent, we can execute them in any order. Test case number 10, test case number 2, test case number 7, etc. Sometimes the repetition of steps in several test cases seems redundant, but the advantages of creating independency in the test cases outweigh the inconvenience of the copy-paste operation. Poor description of the steps? Imagine that after visiting beautiful San Francisco, you have to drive to Los Angeles for your high school reunion. You ask your friend Arnold, who lives in San Francisco, to write down driving directions from Haight Street in San Francisco to Vine Street in Los Angeles. What if Arnold gives you these directions? Take Highway US 101. Take I-80. Take I-580. Take I-5. Take California 170. Take US 101. Take exit 9A. We sincerely doubt that anyone who is unfamiliar with driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles can use this. The problem will start when you reach US 101 or Step 1 because you will not know whether to go north or south to end up at I-80. Here is a situation where you have steps, but these steps lack clarity, and thus it's hard to use them. What if you are given driving directions like these? Take US 101 south. Take I-80 east. Take I-580 east. Take I-5 south. Take California 170 south. Take US 101 south. Take exit 9A. This set of directions is much better because once you approach the freeway, it's clear what direction, north, south, east, or west, to take. But there is another problem. How would you first get to US 101 south if you don't know San Francisco? Yes, you could ask someone on Haight Street or you could follow the signs, but what is the guarantee that you'll merge onto US 101 at the part that is north of I-80 so that Step 1, take US 101 south, would eventually bring you to Step 2? In the driving directions above, it's not clear how to reach Step 1 because Arnold had an assumption that it's not a big deal to get to US 101, and he knows that the closest part of US 101 is to the north of I-80. We suggest that you fire Arnold as your how-to-get-there consultant and use Google Maps instead. Head north on Divisadero Street towards Page Street. Turn right at Oak Street. Turn right at Octavia Boulevard. Slight right at Central Freeway, US 101 South, and so on. Very nice. The lesson here is that all the steps should be clear and concrete. You should always keep in mind that whatever is obvious to you now can become absolutely unclear in several months. For example, unexplained abbreviations, for example DCBT, compacted wording like SVRL instead of several, and other similar items can become Egyptian hieroglyphics even to the author of the test case. So it will be easier to create and execute a new test case rather than cut through the jungle of these vague steps. By the way, DCBT stands for Do Cross-Browser Testing. Was it impossible to guess? Definitely. A test case that can be executed only by its author should be publicly denounced, burnt, and its ashes thrown into the ocean to make sure that no one will ever try to execute that test case again. Why? What if the test case author gets sick, takes a vacation, departs from the company, or even carelessly dies? Leaving behind an unexecutable test case. Each test case should be created with the thought that another person will have to execute it in the future. But even with all of this, try to remember that excessive details are bad for the maintainability of test cases. So let's try to find a middle way. Poor description of the idea and/or expected result. Both principles that we just talked about. The future can erase from one's memory those things which are crystal clear today. You don't create test cases for yourself, you create them for the company. These are also applicable for describing an idea and/or expected result. Here are the nuances. We don't recommend making a reference to the external document in the descriptions of an idea and/or expected result. When we've talked about sending repetitive scenarios to the QA knowledge base, the reason for doing so was to improve the maintainability of the test cases. In the case of idea and expected result, it's a different story. Example: would it be easy to execute a test case with this idea? In this test case, we check item 21B of the spec 3934, adding credit card to user's account. Or how about a test case with this expected result? Verify that the value of the last step equals the result of the calculation according to the first formula from the top on page 233 of the book Stock Market Finances, where X is the value from step 2, Y is the value from step 24, and Z is a value in the column number of calls corresponding to the value from step 11 in table 1 of the spec S122709. We doubt that you would be happy to execute a test case like that. We have to remember that the purpose of an idea is to explain. If the section idea is empty or modestly states 10, everyone who executes this test case will have to spend several minutes of his time to clarify what the heck he is testing here. We have to remember that the expected result is the information we use along with the actual result to make a decision as to whether a test case passed or failed. Therefore, precision and clarity play a most critical role in expected result. Example, the expected result states, verify that error message is displayed. Mr. Wee executes a test case and sees that the error message is displayed. But what if the error message says, please provide your Social Security number? Well, according to the spec, it should say, your Social Security number is invalid. In this case, the bug will be missed. It wouldn't be Mr. Way's fault, but the fault of the tester who created that expected result. Another example of a bad expected result? Everything works. Lesson recap. Below are examples of bad practices during test case generation or modification. Dependency between test cases. Poor description of the steps. Poor description of the idea and/or expected result. A test case should be independent from all other test cases. In other words, there should be no reliance on test cases from its own and/or any other test suites. A good way to check the independence of a test case inside a given test suite is to change the order in which the test cases are executed, because if the test cases are truly independent, the order of execution doesn't matter. It's imperative that during test case generation or modification, we always think about the testers who will execute that test case after us.